In this video, we're going to talk all about C5 and C6 air conditioning systems and how I went about fixing my C6's air conditioning system for less than 50 bucks.
Toys for life.
Summer's officially here and you just tried your C5 or C6's air conditioning system and it's not working as well as it should, or possibly not at all. So what is the next step and what is the right thing for a Corvette owner to do? Well, that's the subject of today's video, and like a lot of things, the answer can be a little bit murky. One school of thought is that our C5 and C6 air conditioning systems are very complex and complicated, and so there's nothing that you can safely do about it anyway, and you must bring your Corvette in to a local qualified and certified air conditioning technician. And generally speaking, that's not horrible advice. However, it is summer, and for many of us, our Corvette summer driving season is kind of short, so hopefully you can find a shop that can get you in before summer's over. Hopefully you can find a shop with a qualified technician who will do the job right the first time. Hopefully you can have your car get repaired at their shop without getting damaged or scratched while it's there. And finally, you're likely going to need to be ready to drop some serious cash to take care of the cost of the repair. Now, I'm half kidding about some of the things I just listed, but honestly, trying to find a good mechanic who does a great job, who's careful with your car, who's not booked 4 weeks out and charges a fair price in 2025 can be quite a challenge. On the other hand, there's another school of thought that says servicing your air conditioning system is not rocket science, and in fact, you've probably seen those giant flashy cans at your local auto parts store, especially in the summertime, or even perhaps at your Walmart, that make it seem as though recharging your air conditioning system is about as easy as refilling your windshield wiper reservoir. So which school of thought is correct? Now, I don't claim to be an air conditioning expert, and why would I be? Here in Minnesota, we only get about 15 days each summer that are above 90 degrees, so our air conditioning systems are barely used anyway. And believe it or not, the air conditioning systems that come in most of the General Motors cars are considered by many industry experts to be some of the most reliable and robust air conditioning systems in the industry. That having been said, I have done a fair bit of air conditioning work on General Motors cars that I've owned through the years, and I do have a good understanding of how the systems work, and so should you if you're going to attempt a repair. So let's take a quick peek and dive into how the air conditioning system actually works. Your Corvette's air conditioning system is closed and circular in design, as it uses a series of hoses and tubes and components to circulate refrigerant through the vehicle, and it removes heat from the passenger area of the car and dissipates it out to the environment. Within the air conditioning system's hoses and tubes, refrigerant moves as a low-pressure gas to the air conditioning compressor, where it is compressed into a high-pressure gas and moved towards the front of the car into the condenser. When any gas is compressed, its molecules get much, much closer together, and so the heat that was contained within all of the low-pressure refrigerant molecules get very concentrated as it is pressurized and condensed inside of the condenser. This has the obvious effect of heating up the condenser, which is usually made of aluminum with a series of tubes that are surrounded by a whole bunch of fins with lots and lots of surface area. Then the Corvette's cooling fan and the effect of the Corvette moving down the road at speed flows a lot of air through the condenser with all of that surface area and cooling fins, and as you can imagine, it has the effect of removing the heat from the condenser and dissipating it into the atmosphere. As the highly pressurized refrigerant snakes its way through the condenser, it turns to a liquid, and then it makes its way to the accumulator where debris and moisture are removed. Then the refrigerant leaves the accumulator and it heads over to the expansion valve, where it is metered, regulated, and its flow is restricted so that it can enter into the evaporator, where there's a bunch of low pressure, and the evaporator is located deep inside the dash of your Corvette. When the relatively high pressure cool refrigerant enters into the low pressure area inside of the evaporator, rapid expansion of its molecules take place, and you guessed it, that has a dramatic cooling effect, which in turn cools the metal that the evaporator is made out of. Then finally, the warm and oftentimes moist air that's being sucked into your Corvette's vent system passes through that very cold evaporator, which steals a lot of the heat from that air, and ultimately the air is blown into the interior of the Corvette, which cools the inside very effectively due to the very small interiors our C5 and C6 Corvettes have, especially as compared to other GM vehicles. Then the whole process repeats itself once again as the low pressure gas refrigerant exits the evaporator and heads back towards the compressor to be compressed. Hopefully most of this makes sense and helps take at least some of the mystery out of how our Corvette's air conditioning systems actually work. Now, I'm not going to try to talk you out of seeking professional help to repair your air conditioning system, but I will show you how I went about repairing my C6's air conditioning system a few days ago for less than $50. First, be sure to wear a pair of safety glasses and gloves. Second, it is illegal to intentionally release refrigerant into the atmosphere, and it's also bad for the environment, so don't do it. If for any reason you have refrigerant in your system and you need it removed, be sure to bring it to a qualified shop that's certified. They have a reclaiming machine that will actually suck all of the refrigerant out of your vehicle and safely either use it or dispose of it. Third, if you've had to do any sort of major repair to your air conditioning system, like replace a hose, replace a condenser with a hole in it, or replace a bad compressor, your entire system is now full of regular air and moisture, and you need to have a professional make the repair from this point forward, or you need to be trained to use a proper set of gauges and a vacuum pump to thoroughly be able to remove all of that air and moisture out of your air conditioning system before recharging it. If none of these scenarios apply to you and you just turned on your Corvette's air conditioning for the first time this season and it's not working well, then I like to start by testing the pressure in the system. First, make sure the engine's not running and it hasn't been run for at least a half an hour. This allows the pressure inside of the system to equalize so that we can get a fairly accurate pressure reading. To do this, you'll need this inexpensive R134 hose and gauge kit that you can pick up for around 20 bucks, and you don't even need a can of refrigerant at this time. There are two main air conditioning lines underneath your hood. One is significantly thicker than the other. This will be the low pressure side of the system, and it's the one we want to connect to. Simply unscrew the cap on the service port, pull up on this little collar, and then press the connector onto the service port and release the collar. You should instantly see a fair bit of pressure on your gauge, and the amount of pressure is going to vary depending on the temperature of the refrigerant in the line and whether or not your system has a full charge or not. My static pressure is around 100 pounds per square inch, which is in the ballpark for where it should be based upon the temperature of the refrigerant in my hose and according to this handy dandy R134A static pressure chart. A few days ago when my air conditioning was not working so well, my static pressure was 50 pounds per square inch with the refrigerant at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and this told me that most likely my system is low on refrigerant. If you're unlucky and your gauge is showing zero pressure, try disconnecting and reconnecting it to the service port. If you're still at zero pressure, then most likely you have a major leak in your system, and unfortunately the entire system has taken in outside air, which includes moisture. If this happens to be your scenario, you have to have the source of the leak identified and repaired, and then a vacuum needs to be applied to your system to remove all of the air and moisture from the system before it is recharged with oil and refrigerant. This is beyond the scope of this video, and for most of us, this is a job that's best left for an AC professional. If, like me, your static pressure is on the low side, but above, say, 30 pounds per square inch, Then I would proceed to step 2, which entails leaving the gauge connected to the system, and we're going to check the low side pressure with the air conditioning fully running. To do this, go ahead and start your engine and turn the air conditioning to max with the fan speed set to high. Make sure the compressor and the recirculate buttons are both turned on, and be sure to leave both of the car's doors open, and this is important because you don't want the interior of the car to reach the set temperature, which would cycle the compressor off and mess up your gauge reading. Now have an assistant inside the car hold the throttle at 1400 RPMs, which is where the engine would be as you typically drive down the road, and then wait for the reading on the gauge to stabilize and write down that number. Mine's at about 27 PSI, and it's about 70 degrees here in the shop, and that's a little bit on the low side when you take a look at this chart, and that makes perfect sense because I was in the middle of adding a little top off to my system when the idea popped into my head to make this video. Your pressure is going to vary depending on several different factors, including the air temperature, the level of humidity in the air, the state of your system's charge, if you've got any regular air or moisture in your system, and of course, the health of your compressor. If you decide to go ahead and add refrigerant to your C5 or C6 Corvette, I've got a couple of strong opinions I'd like to share. First, our systems use R134A, and I will not use any sort of product that has any sort of sealant or seal conditioner added to the can. Now, it's true that they might seal up the very tiny leaks that you could have, but I've seen plenty of evidence that convinces me that they won't seal up anything much more than that. And over time, they will harden inside your system and most likely damage your compressor or other components of your air conditioning system. Instead, I only use plain Jane vanilla R134A refrigerant when topping off my C5 or C6 with no other additives inside the can. Second, when topping off your system with R134A, give it a 5 to 10 second squirt while kind of rotating the can a little bit. Never tip the can all the way upside down because in this position it's possible refrigerant in the form of a liquid can make it to the compressor and destroy it because you can't compress a liquid. Third, and I touched on this already, but it's important, if your system is at or near zero pressure, that means it's full of air and humidity. You can't recharge it. It has to be professionally serviced. Fourth, when I'm topping off an R134A system, I always use the chart right over here and use it for the temperature of the air that I'm in and resist the temptation to overcharge your system. If in doubt, it's better to slightly underfill your system than it is to overfill it. Now that your system is topped off with refrigerant, it should be cold enough to freeze just about anybody out of your car if the air conditioning is left on too long. If you're looking for a specific number, I would say somewhere between 40 and 45 degrees is a decent number to shoot for. Well, that's a wrap on this one, guys. If I missed anything or if you have any interesting air conditioning stories to tell, go ahead and leave a comment below. While you're there, tap that thumbs up. And most of all, thanks for watching.